GenFriends. I'm your host, Cheri Hudson Passey from Carolina Girls Genealogy. And with this wonderful panel tonight, we've got Mary Kircher Roddy from MKR Genealogy. Hi, Mary.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here.
Mary and her beautiful quilt behind her.
Brand new. Just finished it.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Absolutely beautiful. We've got Shelley Murphy, family tree girl, with us tonight. Hi. How are you?
Hi, good evening from Virginia. Hope everybody's well.
So good to have you. We have Laura Hedgecock from Treasure Chest of Memories. Hi, Laura.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Always good to have you. We also have Melissa Barker, the archive lady, with us tonight. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, everybody from the great state of Tennessee. Glad to be here.
Glad you're here. And last but not least is Dan Earl, family history guy. Hi, Dan.
Hello.
So glad you're here. We are going to talk about Finding Your Roots, episode 14, which aired recently. And we wanted to talk about that. We had on this show, I want to make sure I get everybody right, because, you know, I make mistakes all the time. We had Lupita Nyong'o. She actually was in 12 Years a Slave. She's from Kenya. And I think what they said on the show was she was the first African woman to earn a Golden Globe. What it was?
Oscar.
An
It was an
Oscar.
Oscar.
It's
Oscar.
the first, I think it was like the first
Woman
black
from Africa.
woman, a black woman from Africa.
Yeah.
From Africa. How wonderful is that?
Yes, it was exciting.
It's very
And she was also in Black Panther that I just watched
Oh,
because I made the mistake of asking my husband a question about the Marvel things. And
Like
then
the
he says,
Marvel
oh, we need to watch them all. And we're going to watch them in order. And we are. And we're like on number 19 of 23. So,
God.
and Scarlett
this-
Johansson is in.
And you're making
Is it
little
the
marks in your cell on the
Yes.
wall
Oh,
of
that's
your cell.
in it.
Exactly.
That's it.
Avengers, Xfinity Wars, you get Johansson and all of those
Yes.
too.
Exactly.
Yes.
Scarlett Johansson was in
Yes, Scarlett.
right? Scarlett Johansson. And then we had Chef Lidia Bastianich, and I want to say her name right, so I wanted to write it down and say it right. So what was interesting about these three people was that all three of them came from ancestors who had gone through quite through history, but it was challenging times. They were hard times. It was war and poverty and so many things. And on top of that, not only knowing the history, was the social history as well what was going on. And so we thought we would talk about those aspects and how it can help you as you do your genealogy. What are some of the things that you can look for? And we always recommend, as you're watching these genealogy TV shows, they're wonderful entertainment, but if you watch them for how they're going about finding the records and what types of records they're using, little light bulbs can go off in your mind. But oh goodness, I can look at those types of records myself and use those kind of methodologies to find my people. So I guess we could start with Lupita from Kenya, and of course her father was involved with the revolution there, and he was arrested and he was put in a torture chamber basically, and the family didn't know where he was for a long, it was 26 days or something like that. And
Or whether he would come back.
or if
Right.
he would come back.
If he would come back, that's
If
the
he would-
truly scary
Yeah.
that you think those. Yeah.
Exactly. And as a small child, she really didn't know what was going on with them, but they were able to pull records from the newspaper, which I think sometimes we forget to look at that newspaper and find information about him in that time period that she knew absolutely nothing about. So through those newspapers, they were able to bring more information and help with her story. And so I love newspapers, and I would just like to recommend to everybody, look at the newspapers and see what was going on at the time that your ancestor lived in a specific place. Because there are things that were happening that your ancestor was either involved in or knew about that affected their lives. And that can springboard you into thinking, oh, maybe they were involved. What kind of records may have been created because that was happening in their tiny little, it could be a little town, a little community thing that was going on. It could be the country, it could be worldwide. So don't forget to find out what was going on in your ancestors' lives. Anybody else want to? I don't want to do all the talking. Who else wants? Shelley.
Yeah.
And then
I have a quick comment. When you're talking about newspapers and what was going on, remember she was not born in Kenya. Didn't they say she was born in Mexico? And
Yes.
then her family went back and she was raised in Kenya.
right.
That's another tip right there, is understanding that there could have been some migration or relocation temporarily due to whatever is going on, which
Right.
leads you right back to the newspaper, and also knowing the community history or the county or whatever it is. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
critical.
That's quite a move, so why did they move?
Huge.
What was going on? Why would you go, that far? So, a very good. Go ahead, Mary.
She had a couple things. I mean, that was fascinating to me, that I think she had a sister, and she said their mother
Yes.
had them burning her father's papers when he
Yeah, that
was
was
in this.
amazing, right?
I mean, just throwing them in the fire. She didn't know what she was doing, but
Yeah,
just
because she was little. What was she, like 3 or 4? So she had no idea.
yeah, just to get rid of the evidence. I mean, was just so interesting. But and you talked about newspapers, Cheri. I think with also map the history and where stuff was going on. I mean, it will come a little bit more, I think, in Lydia's story, but
Yes.
Oh,
those
yes.
events, I mean, those riots or other things that these families were involved with,
Right.
you want to figure out how close was that? Could they hear it from their house? And how scary is that for a child? I mean, I think about my great-great-grandparents and, the church that they were married in. There was like huge riots in Berlin, just a few blocks from there, a couple weeks after they got married. And so it was obviously their neighborhood. And so anyway, it just to find the sense of place and time is really important.
Exactly. And, I'm hoping that as she went through the book that they give, or Book of Life, maybe that will encourage her to write down some of her experiences that she had, so that isn't lost. Because we're talking about finding your roots, talking about your ancestors, but she was living that part as they were discovering what her dad went through. She was a witness, she was a participant in that time. So I'm hoping that she'll write down stories to pass down what she was feeling, all those kind of things. So it's not just that clip on the TV show to say, hey, I did this TV show, listen to this, kids, when she gets to that point. That she actually journals it so that she can remember that part of the story.
And her mother still appears on her show, which is amazing. And cooking and comments and loves her food.
Yeah,
We're still on Lupita.
Yeah, on Lupita. I thought you
Yeah,
switched
yeah.
over. I'm
It's
sorry.
fine. No, it's fine. We've got
Yeah,
all
no.
these pieces. Sometimes they get combined.
Lupita's story is a perfect example, because as genealogists, we're always asking the questions why. Why
Yeah.
did they move here? Why did they do that?
Right.
And there may not be a specific document that spells that out, but researching the social history of where they were, what was going on at the time, could help you to, explain why they did what they did. Like Lupita and her family moving to Mexico, and then they moved back. And of course, then you think, well, why are you moving back? I mean, it's horrible there, but you know what? They did. And so you could document that part of the social history.
I think that's the linking of the 3 women and the families and what happened. And he starts that off, Dr. Gates does, but the linkages of what their family went through.
Right.
And some things they didn't know. Lupita did not know about her grandfather in the military.
Exactly. That's another thing that was brought up to her, was that her grandfather actually served. They found papers,
The British,
in the British archives, that her grandfather had fought for, Britain, for that side, during World War II. And that was a big shock to her. And another shock to her as they looked at newspaper accounts and archives and, asking the question why and what he did, was that he actually, in her mind, was on both sides, not in the war, but both sides being, he fought in the war, yet he was part of, as a police officer, he was part of controlling some of the tribes and things like that, so they wouldn't uprise. And she was like, oh, maybe he was on the wrong side during that, in her mind, the wrong side and the right side when it came to the war. So I thought that was really interesting that, and she said, we have to have empathy for our ancestors because we don't know why they did the things that they felt they had to do to take care of their families and, feed them, clothe them, all those types of things. So,
yeah, I thought he asked each of them about what they felt their identity was before and after they learned about their ancestors. And I thought it was very interesting that her initial answer wasn't that she identified with one nation. I think her father would be very different because he was so involved in Kenyan politics, but her answer was more, we are this group that took this particular immigration route into East Africa. So I thought that was very interesting how she identified herself.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that too. That was really good. Does anybody else have anything they want to say about her story before we move on?
At the end, and this doesn't have social history, but at the end they talked about the DNA like they did all of them.
Yes.
And that she was her strand of DNA that and I'm saying this from a person who does not do DNA, but it sounded interesting, that she a long line of MT DNA of Eve or something. So if someone knows about that, they can explain it. I don't have any idea what that is. I just found it interesting.
Yeah,
her DNA went back to mitochondrial Eve, that it was the sort of the same mitochondrial group. And so because if you winnow back all of everyone's mitochondrial DNA, it goes back to a single female ancestor that's identified as mitochondrial Eve. Same thing with Y Adam. All males Y genes can go back to a single male. And so she basically descends from that same. So what Dr. Gates said is that she transcends race, because all races go back to that haplogroup.
Mitochondrial Eve, yeah.
absolutely.
And one other comment I want to make, and this is for all three of them, but I really felt it a lot with Lupita, is that, and I wrote this down, the stories on this episode with these women mainly being told through photographs. You know, and so then that makes me think about us and our ancestors and the photographs that we have, and how we can take our photographs and help to tell our ancestors' story with those photographs. And not just the people in the photographs, but the places in the photographs, the things in the photographs. You know, when I teach about doing things with photographs, that's what I'd say. Don't even look at the people. Look at what's behind them. Look at the buildings. Look at the cars. Look at the dog, the pets. I'm going to be doing next week a presentation on researching your ancestors' pets.
Yeah, exactly.
And how they can help you with your genealogy.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Oh, that's too cool.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
But no, I just found it was great that they used the photographs that they use, especially in the Lupitas, because of, I'm always amazed at what photographs they come up with, first of all, because, you know, they have a hard time finding documents, but they've got these photographs. So it's always great.
Yeah. You know, go ahead, Laura. Go ahead.
This is going to sound controversial, because I know we're trying to help people research their own family history. But I think sometimes going across an ocean, going to Africa, it's an area of expertise we're not all great at. Sometimes hiring a professional, it should be on the table. Sure, we should look and see what we could do. I think, and some of those rich photographs and the access to newspaper articles and stuff, I probably couldn't have afforded it, but if you can afford it, I think we shouldn't underestimate the beauty and the gift of having that kind of
So true.
try to
Yeah.
asset our,
Right. I agree.
that's a I guess resources. That's an incredible resource when you're faced with a whole culture that you don't have access to, you don't understand well.
Exactly. You know, when you were talking about pictures, Melissa, it reminded me of Scarlett Johansson's comments. They were showing her where her father, grandfather, where they lived, her paternal side, no, excuse me, her maternal side lived in Poland, right?
Yes.
And, and she said, I would have wanted to leave too. When
Yes.
She saw,
Yeah.
when she saw the area that they were living in, I would have wanted to leave too. And
I dare say if we saw the pictures of where our ancestors came from, we would probably say the same thing.
I'm glad
Yeah.
they left, right? I'm glad they came to America. That's kind of how she was feeling. Now, she had one branch, her uncle didn't come with her father, didn't come.
Right.
Yeah.
And that side of the family ended up in the Warsaw Ghetto, which we know was, you know, where the Nazis gathered the Jewish people that were living at
Yeah.
the time. And
It was actually her great great grandfather's brother. So it
Oh, I'm
it
so sorry.
it was a great
Thank
yeah
you.
just
Thank you.
who wanted to, because understanding how close it is,
Right.
she didn't
Thank
really
you.
know that story because it was
Right.
so far back in the
Yeah.
generations.
I was thinking it was on her mom's side that they went.
It was.
I think it was.
Maternal side, but it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
Thank you for keeping me straight.
Yeah.
Y'all gotta keep me straight. Well, and then you start watching these stories and they all start combining together.
Exactly.
But yeah, she didn't know about that. And they ended up, you know, not living through that. And another example of finding out that information was going to the Holocaust Museum records. And sometimes I think we forget to branch out. You know, we find these things in history. You know, our ancestors were part of this, our family members were part of this. So where can we go from there to find records about them? And so there are so many museums out there that collect and record information on various historical things. And the Holocaust Museum is one of those.
Yeah, we have one very close to, so here in Farmington Hills where I live. And I have friends that are docents and they said, getting to be a docent is like taking a university course.
Oh, I'll bet.
It's not like you go in and they give you a tour and say, let loose. Those people are experts.
They gotta study it. Yes.
Yeah, and that's just the docents. So the administrators and stuff, those people are experts.
So they do know. So contact the museums in the places where your ancestors lived. If there is an event, historical event that happened that you know about in their area, or maybe you think that they may have been a part of, you know, because they lived in that time, check them out and see what kind of records they have and see how much you can add to the family story by going to these museums. Don't forget those. So, I mean, that was so sad. I mean, if her ancestor had not immigrated, you know, she wouldn't be here. Their side of the family were lucky ones because they got out. And you see that happen time and time again. And some of us have it in our own family history that, you know, if that particular ancestor, you wouldn't be here. I'm grateful you're all here.
And what was it with the Sweden that was a shock for her?
Right, that was her paternal side.
Right.
Yeah, because she thought the whole time, you know, we're from Denmark. I'm going to get, you know, she'd been to Denmark because her father had lived there, and she
did some time there. Yeah.
Taken a tour with him and saw the places.
Well, she has a Danish citizenship too. She has dual citizenship.
Yes, dual.
Well, but it was like her great grandfather, I think, they found a record in the 1920s where he wasn't born. I mean, they found some records for him in Denmark and then no more because he was an immigrant from Sweden to Denmark.
Exactly. They found a marriage record, I think was the last.
I can't remember the record, but and she was shocked.
Yeah.
And then they got her way back in Sweden.
Yeah, Dan, you raised your hand.
I did. Yeah, I was trying to be like Laura was earlier, raising hand. But I think that's sort of that's representative of a lot of bias that European American researchers have, is that we trace back to another country, and we just imagine our ancestors have lived there since time immemorial, and we don't take into account boundary changes or push-pull factors that could have meant that they've lived in other places, right? And so, and often which those are what's represented in our DNA, because that goes back thousands of years, whereas the paper trail may only go back hundreds of years if we're lucky. And we don't get to, we don't get to see those push-pull. Like, I have a high percentage of Norwegian DNA, but I don't have a paper trail to Norway, but I have a paper trail to England. And if there's one thing Vikings like to do, it was show up in England and, hang out with the ladies. And then, and so that explains it. And that's
how that happened, huh?
Right. Yeah. So there's that history where those segments of DNA make sense,
right,
absent of the paper trail. But there's no need for me to just assume that there was some type of misattributed parentage somewhere along the line that I can reasonably explain that. And my Y-DNA proves that I have honest female ancestors, at least on that line. So.
Well, I was wondering, hang on, Laura, just, and then I'll go to you. I was wondering, because they jumped and found the information in Sweden, but they didn't really say how. I mean, did they just start spreading out? So I'm wondering if there was a history of immigration during that time frame. Something was going on and they knew about it, but it just didn't make the cut to explain how they jumped to Sweden. Suddenly we just found somebody in Sweden. You know what I mean? There has to be a reason that they went to Sweden. So I'm wondering, as we're talking about, learning what was going on at a time period, if that was a clue to start looking for records in Sweden.
Yeah.
But maybe, Laura?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I agree with everything Dan said. And I have the same thing. My British DNA, no one can say how old that, because a lot of that came from Scandinavia. But I'd like to bring it back around to the question. I disagreed a little bit when we're talking about identity. Like he says, you're going to have to get rid of that Danish passport. Like, I was the person that took my kids out of the South and had them born in Detroit. Their legacy, I mean, part of their identity is they come from a long line of Southerners. Like a few hundred years. Yeah. But I cannot take away the 25 and 23 years.
True. They
have identified themselves as Detroit Metro or Michiganders. And I don't think the fact that there's this hundreds of years behind that there were Southerners erases that identity.
Well, speaking of that, Laura.
Do you know something?
No, but I was just going to say, if we move on over to our wonderful chef, do you remember what she
Before we go there, can I make a comment?
Oh, yes, I was just going to say, she made a great comment on that.
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
Two things, actually. Okay. One is this should show us that we should always keep our eyes wide open. When a lot of genealogists think, okay, I'm Swedish, well, then we don't look anywhere else. Or we're Northerners. We don't look anywhere else, whatever it is. And we should always keep our eyes open. But the other thing I wanted to mention, if anyone noticed this but me, when the show comes on, they do little snippets at the beginning of sound bites from the individuals.
Right.
Sound bite from Scarlett and said something, but it was never addressed in her actual show part.
Yes.
She said that her father called her a Viking princess.
Viking princess, yeah.
Now, I don't know if she was saying that just as a offhand thing that he called her that, but then I was looking for it in the show for something to be said more about that, but there was nothing else said about it.
Yeah.
Very
interesting.
Very
well. Good listening skills there, Melissa.
They did get her back to Swedish royalty, though, or nobility, not royalty.
Nobility.
But they never
Swedish
mentioned
nobility.
Viking. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Then how do you explain mine?
Oh well, we just don't know.
It's just a bundle because every one of the places you identify, and I pulled up and I looked at that and I thought, I got to understand this a little more because I hate to say it, but the digging is getting harder and harder. And it's not just going back, but it's also understanding, like you said, if there was a migration or this, that, other, I got to go understand that culture, what happened, that religion, whatever the reasons are, and this head is about to explode, you know, and stuff. And it's very interesting. And I know I'm not the only, say, African-American with that, all that within me. I'll say it that way. But again, it's learning some of this stuff, because it's interesting that some little small pieces of some of these other cultures come down, and it's like, where did that come from? And I'm referencing like the North and the South type thing. Well, or New England. And it's like, well, that would have came from somewhere that, you know, or got handed down by somebody. You know, so I think it's a challenge for researchers, not if they'll make more of their own challenges or their own brick wall by not going by the things we suggested about learning about what was happening in that community and in that area.
Absolutely. So to move over to Lidia, she said that identity is who you feel you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then she
Beautiful.
said nationality is the changing of the borders around you. And she knows of where to speak, because her ancestors, well, even herself when she was growing up, because of the little place that she lived in Istria, it kept going back and forth to who owned where she lived, to the point where her ancestors kept having to change the spelling of their last name
and the language.
Yeah,
and she said by a stroke of a pen.
Right,
which,
by a
you know,
stroke
just,
of a pen.
just changed it.
Your last name either was, you know, Italian,
right?
You had to change it over to Croatian, right? And so that's got to be weird. Your last name, but some of it was done for protection, you know, of the family, and then some of it was done by law. So that's another good point for people. We've talked about this before. Names are spelled differently, but we've also got to look at the fact that it might not be spelled differently because they were illiterate and they were just spelling things different, or there was no spelling rules at the time. But a lot of it is because of protecting your family or the law, is what we said. So that is another reason to look at what was going on at the time. If you keep seeing that name change, why? And for her family, it was those border changes. Dan.
Yeah, so when my great grandparents and my grandmother immigrated from Hungary, which was and they weren't far from where she was at, on all of his naturalization paperwork, it listed 3 different towns that he was born in 3 different countries, and I thought, this guy's nuts. He doesn't even remember where he's born. But when I looked it up, when he was born, the town was called one thing, and it was just on the Austrian side of the border. And then when he left, it was called Keglevichaza, and it was in Hungary. And then when he was beginning the naturalization process, it was in Serbia for a little while, and then the border switched, and now it's Ceglevici in Romania. And so he was spot on accurate every single time he filled out that paperwork. And here I thought
that's why
where he came from.
That's why it's important that we do the hard research.
Gotta do
like
it.
Dan has, because it sounds like Dan's done it, because he knows that he was telling. That's why it's important that we do, even if it's not another country. Let's just take the United States, where we have the cities that change names, or boundaries that change in states or counties and whatever. You know, it's important for us to do that, because, or else I think we will get confused when we look at some of these records and one says this and one says that. My grandfather was born in a city in West Virginia that doesn't exist anymore. I have found one map that has it on it.
And that was when it was Virginia, not West Virginia.
No, when it was West Virginia, because he was born in 1909. It was my grandfather.
Okay.
My grandfather.
Yeah.
So, but I can't find. I mean, it was like it never existed. And so, you know,
think about census records too. We look at them because we want to see where our immigrant ancestors have come from, and we can have, you know, decades of it changing back and forth, and that's because of the same thing. And people especially new people starting research, they get confused. How come this says Poland and then this says, whatever the boundary would have been at the time? And that's what the enumerators were putting on there, what the country was called at the time. That's
Yeah. And so, and even here in the US, when county lines change, like I have the opposite with my ancestors. That if you look at the records, it looks like they moved around, but they stayed on the same farm,
Right.
and the counties changed.
or the state.
So or the state could change. So yeah, for sure. It's the same thing. It's understanding the history of that area,
Right.
the boundaries, the geopolitics,
Exactly.
and all that stuff.
Mary?
Well, it's just, I mean, it really is a clue also to time and maybe exactly where they were.
Mhm.
I have somebody who was on one census, it shows he was born in Utah Territory.
Yeah.
But in a later census, it said he was born in Nevada. Now, Utah Territory was a big place, but I can tell he was in this little part over here of Utah Territory because it was later identified as Nevada. So he was in that part. When he was born, there was no Nevada. It was part of Utah Territory, but you can winnow down the location by paying attention to those clues. And like Dan did with when was that record created, what year, and what did that encompass?
Exactly. Now, Shelley,
Yes, ma'am.
you recommend always, and a lot of us choose, but you recommend all the time, this is your thing, is the timeline. The
I
timeline will
do.
help you, put all these things together and see what is going on or what was going on, because you can add all that kind of stuff to your ancestors' timeline.
Yeah, I think it's critical, and Melissa brought up a great point, talking about West Virginia, but even moving back to Virginia, you have states that broke off from Virginia also, Tennessee, Kentucky, so on. But it's interesting when they changed, because there's a third great grandfather born in Loudoun County, Virginia in 1807. But then when I look at his grandfather, I thought, well, wait a minute. It's not Loudoun, it's Fairfax. So I had to know, prior to 1757, now I got to look at Fairfax because it changed. I go into Jefferson County, which is now West Virginia, which went through 4 different county names prior to becoming Jefferson County in 1801. And depending on how you do that timeline, you're going to miss something that could be back there to help you on your research. So the chronological timeline of everything that's happening in and around that community and where your ancestors were at, I think helps with lessen the brick walls.
Some of the computer genealogy programs will help you build a timeline, and
yes,
and they will add historical timelines in there as
but
well.
National, not necessarily local, and that's what you want to make sure you incorporate local.
Right. Yeah. So it just depends on what's going on. They'll tell you what things were being invented. And that's an interesting thing, oh, the television was, or the radio was invented. I wonder if my ancestor had that, and you can start.
So I know 2 great, so you're right about the genealogy sites doing it. Family Search does it, but there's ourtimelines.com. That's great at generating those other scientific facts.
Yes.
And there's a software called Precedent. It's like a $50 software. It's great for putting together your own timelines. Like you can take the information from these other sources. But there are some great tools out there.
That's why I like to use, actually, I use Legacy Family Tree from my database on my desktop. And as I put in information, it's listed in a timeline format.
Yes.
Yeah, Rich Magic does that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And I'm with you, Shelley. I'm with you, Shelley, on the West Virginia. My family was a lot of them were from West Virginia. And during that time in 1863, when it was Virginia, then West Virginia.
June 20th, 1863.
Yes. And so I deal with that as well.
The only reason I know that specifically is because my second great grandparents are married June 19, 1863. West Virginia says, oh, Virginia kept that. Virginia says, no, we gave that to West Virginia. I have a Bible entry that gives me the June 19, 1863. And it's been 20 some years since I've, known that and still haven't found a record. It's caught between one of these places, and Jefferson County didn't lose their records. So it's there. It's there. Because somebody backed up a wagon at the Civil War, loaded it up, took everything over to Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. No, I'm serious, for Jefferson County, West Virginia, and took everything out of the courthouse. And then when the war was over, it came back, and the same thing happened with Loudoun County, even Revolutionary War time. They removed everything and then brought it back. So they didn't lose records.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dan, you have a suggestion for another timeline app?
Yeah, so the website Twile, Twile, it's now part of the Find My Past family, but they have a really interesting and functional one that's designed specifically for genealogy, where you can add sort of macro historic events, and then you can go in and personally add individual things, and you can link a family tree to it, and it will pull data. And I've used it for looking for questions to ask at family gatherings, because
that's an idea.
Yeah,
go
ahead.
I was just going to say, because I had known, but I'd never noticed and thought of it in the fact that my mother's father had passed away before she and my father got married. And so I'd never thought to ask my mom who walked her down the aisle when they got married, because I just, in my head, I knew that my grandfather had passed away before my parents got married, but I'd never seen those two facts so close together that my brain put two and two together and said, oh, you should ask your mom who walked her down the aisle. And so it's a great tool to kind of manipulate that, and you can pull data in and out, and really kind of see what questions maybe you've missed to ask either yourself or others. So
that's great.
Yeah, on that one, it's not been maintained exactly the same since my past took over, but if you dig a little bit, and I think I have a post that has the links in it, there's some pre-constructed timelines for military history and things like that that are really, really helpful. I have to turn off the sports because I was doing my grandmother, and the sports are international. So it would say every year there was a Tour de France. And I'm like, yeah, that's not helping me. You can turn those things off. So it's pretty cool.
You're muted, Cheri.
Sorry?
No, she's.
No?
Oh, am I gone?
Now you're back.
Okay. To me,
Far away, but she's back.
To me, it looks like everything is fine. Let me just say real quick, I was thinking about the local things that were going on. Check those county histories, because a lot of them have a timeline in them that you can incorporate into your timeline and help you understand what things were happening, and maybe records to look for and things to ask at the historical societies. So, and museums and archives. So look at those as well. Mary?
As far as timelines, there's sometimes you just find weird things in weird places. I found a city directory that had a timeline for for a particular year, and it was everything that happened in that community, and the trials and the worst winter with the ice cakes in the river and all sorts of things. So
you can find those,
if you can find them in a city directory and then correlate that with things that were going on in your family. Was, did the orphanage burn when your ancestor lived there?
Yeah.
I would also suggest newspapers. Newspapers sometimes will do the year that was, and then they will list all the stuff that that happened.
Yeah.
But comment that I wanted to make about Lidia, which if you'll remember when she was talking about the people that were leaving, that were getting on the boat, and they were leaving. And they were talking about, you know, they brought all their tables and their chairs. And then she said they even dug up the bones of their
Yes.
family members
Oh,
out of the
Yes.
cemetery. Okay, so then it made me think, okay, got that. But okay, were they reinterred when they got here? And is that notation made in the because I don't have any ancestors that brought their bones that I know of yet. And so does anyone have any experience with that or have heard that? I mean, how would that work? Did you just go to a cemetery and say, I have these bones and I wanted, you know?
You didn't leave anybody behind.
Well, no, but what happens when you got here? How did they get
I think
buried?
they probably reburied them. And I think it's worth doing a little study on that. I mean, you know, digging and finding out, because I wonder if there's any religious type thing connected with that or some type of practice. I don't know. I'm questioning that. I don't know. But it's, to me, it's fascinating. And it's like, we're not leaving anybody behind. You know, bringing everybody.
There's a biblical reference that I know of, is that when the Israelites came out of the Egypt, they dug up and brought the bones of Joseph. If anybody knows that passage. So there's that, but other than that, I don't have any other reference.
Yeah, Cheri, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay,
now?
I had a comment about that too. I wonder if people were necessarily that intentional about the marking of the graves. I know I have a great aunt who donated her body to science. The cemetery, they put a headstone in the cemetery. It's got everything. Nobody would know that there's, if they're not in the family. I mean, it's not widely known that there's not a body there. So the same thing might be happening in Europe, where the cemetery might still exist, but you know, the remains aren't there.
Well, in a lot of places in Europe, I know in Germany, they recycle the graves.
Yeah.
Yes.
You do.
So
Yeah, they have very different funerary practices than we do here in North America, and that's another thing that we have to, as American researchers, once we move into a different culture, we have to change those cultural norms, especially when it comes to burial, because here, when somebody's buried, that becomes their eternal resting place for until whenever, right? But in Europe, it's like, once they're down to bones, we'll just pull the bones out and resell the plot. There's, you know, we're running out of space. That's why we send everybody to America. You know, that's
even if they're already dead, we send them.
sending them back. You know, I mean, it's you know, it's not like they're discovering more Denmark. I mean, they've run out of Denmark, and where do you go after you've run out of Denmark, right? You either get in your long ship and head to England, or you just you know, recycle those graves. So
has everyone noticed all the 400th Mayflower stuff that's going on, and a lot of the things on the History Channel? But I want to bring up a comment about the timeline and this, that, and other. Our 21st century thinking causes challenges. And based on what Dan was just saying, or in everybody, you know, we're going back into time. We really can't take what we know and have experienced in growing up. Number one, not to judge when we get there, but to take what's there. But again, it goes back to the basic learning of the culture and the area, the customs and things, because we're creating our own brick walls because we're questioning and not questioning the right things. The question should be about the records and the presence and the folks, but not a why, because we're past the why. We're going back 100 years, 200 years, whatever it is. Stop questioning about what they did and learn about what was going on to understand, because a lot of that stuff did come. And I thought about that, and I'm switching from finding your roots, but thinking about these pilgrim and these programs, and I'm thinking, did they not know how to do something? You know, because you know, and I watched another one of these shows, and I'm sitting here thinking, wait a minute, you know, the Indians had to help them with this, the Africans helped them with this, and I'm like, did they not grow crops in England? And I've got the England people, guys, and I'm sorry, you know, Jamestown, same thing. What happened that they couldn't? I mean, Jamestown was dying out if it wasn't for the Africans and some of the input of the American Indians that were here. And it's like, oh my God, what was wrong? Or did the religion and those practices overtake the existence of survival? And I don't know, you know. So anyway, that was just my comment about our 21st century thinking. So,
Well, Shelley, somebody might correct me and just I'm absolutely wrong, but for some reason I get the impression, and I have not studied it, that the people that came over during Plymouth and Jamestown and stuff were more upscale, I guess, or more well-to-do.
some of them.
And so maybe they didn't do that, you know,
The
handwork.
riffraff did it for them.
There you go. That they
The
had
what?
people to do that.
Yeah, the riffraff did it for them, so they didn't have to do it themselves.
So
in
they didn't know what to
England.
do when they got here
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
had people to do that there over there. So I
It
don't
was
know. I could be wrong.
unbelievable, the documentary that I was watching.
Mhm.
And then I'm reading, and I shared about my book that I'm reading, you know, and Myrtle and I both are reading it now about the first Quakers were in Virginia and not in Pennsylvania. Wait a minute. I've been told all my life. And then to find out it was women that came over. It wasn't even men, it was 3 women in 1655. Pennsylvania comes later. Yes.
Shelley, I think you're bringing up really good points, and the why are not the why of this, you know, but the why of why did they do these things, so we can learn the records, you know, not why are you here, but why in history, what was going on, and so if we ask those questions, that is going to lead us to more answers. So that really the title of this episode was Ask Why. That's what we really need to call it.
Finding your roots, you know.
Asking why. Does anyone have any last minute things they would like to share about this episode, and maybe things that light bulb moments that went off in their heads about researching? Mary.
I just want to say, talking to you guys about it and getting the nuances of what you saw really enriched the episode more for me. I feel like I want to go back and watch it again and see the stuff that Melissa or Laura Dan or all of you brought up that I missed. So I want to thank you for this discussion. It's really been great today.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I think that's the points that why we like to talk about these shows.
Yeah.
Hoping that the things that we discuss will help other people in their research. So thank you, Mary. Thank you, Laura, for saying that. Because that's our goal for discussing these shows, is just to help people understand that you can learn tips and tricks to find your ancestors. So finding your roots will help you find your roots.
Yeah.
So with that, we will say goodbye, and we will see you next time on GenFriends. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.